All right, let's continue on here. So when it comes to organisms and niches, we come up with these next terms: native versus non-native versus indicator, keystone, and foundation species. These all have specific roles, niches within a community, or they shouldn't have them, and they're in the way. So a native species, these are creatures that normally should exist there. They're native to the ecosystem. They belong there, and they're a part of that community. Non-native species are things that were brought in. They also are known as invasive species or alien species or exotic species. All of these species don't belong in an environment, and they're not part of the community. They've either migrated or deliberately put there because somebody wants to plant a new plant in a new place, or thinks they will handle solving some kind of problem, or they were accidentally brought in. And all of these guys usually aren't in a balanced part of the ecosystem, and as a result, they can really wreak havoc within an ecosystem. What's an indicator species? Well, indicator species are really important, especially for environmental scientists, because they give us an indication of the health and well-being of that ecosystem. So fish are a good example of that. Fish are extremely sensitive to lots of different things. Chemicals in the water, but temperature and oxygen levels are two of the main things that fish are really sensitive to, especially trout. And so when those two things change, which they can change because of pollution and stuff pretty easily, trout are a really good indication that there's something wrong with that ecosystem, and so they're a very good indicator species. Lichens, that's that stuff you see on the side of rocks up in the mountains that kind of almost looks like dried painty stuff. It's actually two organisms. It's a fungus and an algae that live together and hang out. But they're very sensitive to air quality. So if the air is bad outside, they don't like it, and so they're a pretty good indication pretty early on if there's problems as well. So indicator species let us know the health of the ecosystem. If there's been damages or whatever, it's a good warning for us. Keystone species are next. Keystone species, think of it like a keystone is this thing right here at the top of an arch. It is the kind of the one that holds the arch together and takes care of it, and it plays a really important role in this arch being strong and sturdy and successful. And so it kind of has an impact on all the other things around it. And so just like this in this arch, if you remove this, it has an effect on all these other stones up here. And so it determines the types and the numbers of other species that are present in that community. A good example is the American alligator, which we almost hunted to extinction, if you didn't know, and now it's back and thriving. But you can think it allows for only, it eats certain things and keeps certain populations of organisms in check. And so when you remove it, it really changes the dynamics of the ecosystem as a whole. Bees are the other end of the spectrum, but they're also a keystone species. If they're not there to pollinate certain things, we lose out on those organisms and stuff. So removing either the honeybees or the alligators from the system could really have drastically alter and have a dramatic effect on the community and the ecosystem as a whole, and that's what makes it a keystone species. Next are foundation species, which are a variation on the idea of a keystone species. A foundation species, they basically help out the community. They enhance it, and they create benefits for lots of other things. Elephants are a good example of this. You wouldn't think they necessarily promote a lot of things from a vegetation point of view because they're just eating and tearing up stuff. But elephants mess with stuff. They push over and they break and they uproot trees. And this creates openings or holes in the forest. And that promotes grass growth and other species to utilize that are more, they don't like forest areas, they like open plains. And so they provide an important role in enhancing the community and the diversity of the creatures that can live there. And so that's what makes it a foundation species. Think of it like the foundation of a house is kind of really important in creating that good base for an ecosystem, and that's what a foundation species does. A prime example of that is the sea otter. So the sea otter is a keystone species. And so we didn't understand that at first, but these 6 points kind of illustrate that. So back in the day, a bunch of trappers started hunting sea otters because they got some sweet pelts on them. And so they hunted them, and so we saw this huge dip this huge decline in the sea otter population. And so what do sea otters do? They eat these little spiky things called sea urchins. And so as a result, it allowed the sea urchin population to just explode like crazy. And so what do sea urchins eat? They eat kelp. And so they were eating up all the kelp forests. And the problem with that is, without the kelp forests, we have trouble with fish because fish spawn in kelp forests. And so now the fish can't spawn like they used to. So we started to see a decline in the fish population because they didn't have any spawning areas, which then affected fishermen's catches. And so you're like, what? Because we were hunting a sea otter here, there's no fish for fishermen there, and there's 4 trails to get there from the sea otter down through the sea urchin to the kelp to the fish. And so keystone species, because it had such an important role, it dramatically was changing ecosystems. And as a result, we actually created a treaty to protect sea otters and sea mammals because they played such an important role. And now where they've been protected, sea otters are now recovering, which are keeping urchin populations in check, which are keeping the kelp beds are recovering nicely. And so we're starting to see fish nurseries start to grow. And so fishes are being caught in higher quantities now. So that would be a good example of a keystone species for you. All right, that's the end of chapter 4. Thanks.